finally finished my theology course from the very hectic schedule that I have been involving myself in. Although I have actually one more 3,000 word essay that I haven't even completed. So I'm actually looking forward to finishing that. So in the past few weeks, I barely just touched upon some subjects superficially on psychology and one on my dreams, which I probably would actually delete, and some aspects of philosophy and theology. And today we're actually going to be touching upon again on Christian ethics, a subject that I have done in my school prior. But we'll be actually studying this work, The Cares of the Family Man, by Franz Kafka. So if you guys haven't heard of Franz Kafka, he was a 20th century German-speaking Jewish philosopher. And his ideas were very popular. I'm sure if some of you might have heard the term Kafkaesque, you might discern the meaning as something as somebody involving yourself being trapped in this condition, a condition of a bureaucratic judiciary society, a system, in other words, and all you do is to struggle against it, but at the same time still bearing the desire to enact your passions, to do what you can within this trapped, unchanging society or system. Now, The Cares of the Family Man was written sometime in 1914, 1917. So Franz Kafka, just talking about his background, he was born in 1883 in Bohemia, in Prague. But then, so his father was initially a working class man, but then he managed to run a business, married an educated woman, rise to the top, and Kafka was fairly educated in law and was working in an insurance company. But of course, that wasn't exactly what Kafka wanted. At the time, he was actually rivaling against his German counterparts, of course, because he was in the top tier of the intellectual culture. But nevertheless, it didn't stop his genuine passion for writing, his novels. I'm sure maybe some of you have heard of The Trial, Metamorphosis, and The Cares of a Family Man is a short story about this creature called Orgedeck. Perhaps a Slavonic or a Germanic word, which Kafka himself described quite absurdly, but very descriptively. And it portrays some aspect of Kafka's inner shame and guilt, because he was basically abused by his father when he was a kid and when he was young. He never had a very healthy relationship with his father, or let alone his mother, actually. Because he was unable to really fulfill his father's expectations, but became a writer, his father was greatly disappointed in him. And Kafka wrote a letter at one point to his father, which he wasn't ever able to deliver to him. So the stories, he expresses this existential angst in his stories, especially in the story of Orgedeck, or actually The Trial is a better story for that. But as for now, we'll be looking at the story, The Cares of a Family Man. So the original German term for The Cares of a Family Man, I will just refer to my document, because I did a presentation on this just on Wednesday at school. So Kafka's stories typically feature characters who are somewhat fractured, due to their struggle in maintaining their survival in a circumstance, whether that's a familial circumstance, socio-political, etc., where their freedom is being challenged and their capabilities are being put to a test. So, as I have described before, his ideas were absurdist, basically exploring the feeling of existential angst, trying to overcome this inner struggle, but also an external struggle, and combating the feeling of nothingness, of emptiness within the heart. So, he explores the themes mainly, the existential problem of anxiety, anger, guilt, and suffering. So originally, the story, The Cares of a Family Man, was written in German as Die Sorge des Hausvaters. It was written around 1914 to 1917. It portrays a descriptive narrative of a creature called Ujerdek, being implied as one with multiple identities. So he sort of has an intelligible shape as described in the story. It's a very short story, so you can download the PDF if you manage to find it. So Ojerdek transforms into a broken down remnant, as the story suggests. It's made out of threads that are either broken off, entangled, or interwoven with different colors. But on the other hand, Ojerdek was also assembled with small wooden crossbar sticks and a small rod, which are joined together to create limbs for the creature. So in the story, there are a few quotes that carefully describe this creature. Number one, the whole thing looks senseless enough, but in its own way perfectly finished. Number two, since Ojerdek is extraordinarily nimble and can never be laid hold of. It describes sort of an aspect of Kafka's character, although when I did the presentation, because I was actually being a bit one-sided on this and claiming that Ojerdek is Kafka, but the teacher said that he just represents a remnant of Kafka, but not necessarily Kafka himself. Because this creature had a beginning but no end. So going back to that sentence earlier, the whole thing looks senseless enough, but in its own way perfectly nimble. It's nimble but can never be laid hold of. It does represent strong parallels to the author himself, whose spirit was to an extent sacrificed, turning himself into a material commodity, from a Marxist point of view, in order to contribute to the tyrannical capitalist system, which represses, a Freudian, sorry. So the creature's threads, its entangled pieces are actually, in Freud's point of view, are fragments of torn memories, shameful thoughts and feelings. So I can go on about this for a few minutes, but I will definitely just mention that from Kafka's early life till probably his 20s or 30s, he moved from a couple of different residences, from his birthplace, corner of Kaprova and Mysilova streets, to the town square and Skonborn Palace. So in total, he has moved around 15 places. And this resembles Ojerdek's circumstance, where he was often for months not to be seen, presumably moved into other houses, but always comes faithfully back to our house again. But And this as well can be encapsulated in the story when Ojerdek replied to the family man, because the story suddenly turned from the description of Ojerdek to being a first-person narrative, like another person actually witnessing Ojerdek's circumstance. So I was actually speculating that this could be the family man or the father when he asked where Ojerdek lived, and Ojerdek diminutively, like a child, replied, I don't know, fixed abode. So there are further characteristics to this. So Ojerdek has a senseless laughter with no lungs in it. And it's difficult to understand the nature of this, why Ojerdek was like this, unless we put the context of the author into it. There's very little reference to Kafka's life, so it's difficult to really dig into his background. although we know that he moved to several houses, abused by his father, and apparently he married several women before, from a reference I found. Although there wasn't any record that he had kids. So psychologically, Odradek represents an adult who never really grows up. Psychologically stays like a child, emotionally aloof, a schizoid. Although there are cases where children with faulty parents have channeled their anger to their parents by inflicting harm upon the world, like, for example, Hitler, Kafka was the opposite. He expresses his inner turmoil through ideas and philosophy, almost as if he was utilizing his sadness or intellectualizing it in order to achieve total transcendence. So it's not easy, because in the 20th century, war was still on, and it's difficult to achieve what total transcendence is without referencing taking up arms, or going to war and debate on philosophy or ideas. So definitely we can discern that Odradek, or, well, Kafka, if you want to go on that interpretation, experienced an unresolved sets of unresolved emotions and trauma. So he had a faulty relationship to the head of the household, which would affect the dignity of the child. Senselessness could be a product of abuse, like a puppet, being treated like a commodity. From a Marxist perspective, this is definitely, this is very close. It resonates to the Marxist perspective. The Marxists believed that they would concur that the spirit of the commodity would come from material production itself, rather than searching for it oneself. There is a form of religiosity in achieving total transcendence from the power of production, culminating in the output itself. But of course, I don't know. This is just my speculation, and I'm not sure if this is what the story is trying to convey. I would be more inclined to say that Odradek represents Kafka repressed psychology, its entangled threads, representing positive and negative emotions, the variety of colored threads, being the turmoil or the burden it carries, emulating the event of Christ carrying his crucifix, in an attempt to reconcile with his father or a family man, or God, for that matter. Because in the end of the story, it is made clear in the last sentence that Odradek does no harm to anyone that he can see, but the idea that he is to survive me, said the family man, I find almost painful. So there's something a bit patronizing of this, from this, when the father said, expressing his concern in a rather patronizing manner, there's also a sense of disappointment, almost as if Kafka was speaking of himself, where he expresses his guilt of not being able to rise to his father's expectation of the son. So I know that was very, very quick overview due to time constraints, but as well, I don't want to go too long into this. So going back to the beginning, the description of Kafka, of Odradek being entangled in threads, and having like a star-shaped, I don't know if I mentioned that, but he does sort of like have a star-shaped rod inserted in the body. And some scholars interpreted this as a crucifix. Some people, I think my teacher actually said that this was Freud's interpretation, that it could be Kafka's Jewishness. There is a remnant of Kafka's Jewish culture, because Jewish festivals sometimes they use stars or the planets from the cosmos or things like that to use them as elements in their festivals, as decorative elements. So anyway, that's all that I have to say. Let me know what you guys think, and please feel free to leave a comment or criticism, because this is very important to me, that I'm able to improve on my ideas and how I express them. Thank you.
episode.